Hey, welcome to Mikey's Video Game Madness. Today we're playing Sailor Moon R on the Super Nintendo. This is a translated version of a Super Famicom game, which you can get a reproduction cart for if you're interested. Just got to keep an eye out. This is based on the second season of the Sailor Moon series. There was 5 seasons. I don't believe the 5th one ever came out to the West. Sort of finding out all this now. Yeah, so this was one of the more popular animes when anime started to become a thing when it aired on TV. When I first saw it, by the way, this isn't going to make sense, that little Chibi-chan girl you actually saw is actually Usagi's and Mamoru's daughter from the future. That's Mamoru, Tuxedo Mask, and Usagi's Sailor Moon. When it originally came out to the US, Usagi was referred to as Serena. They changed a lot of stuff. The show is completely different than like the Japanese version. It was heavily censored. Some stuff they censored for images being too scary. They changed some characters into females that were originally male and had homosexual relationship with another male because that would be considered taboo. So that's Sailor Venus, which she has a laser attack. That's Sailor Mercury. She has water attack. That's Sailor Moon. She has a tiara attack. That's Sailor Mars, which has a fire attack, and that's Sailor Jupiter, who has lightning attacks, which I think is the best for this game because, like on the show, she's a little bit taller and knows martial arts, specifically kung fu, which makes her good at these types of games because she has a longer range. There's so much I have to fit into this video, and it's going by so fast. I'm actually recording the commentary after I actually played the game. So this is a pretty accurate rendition visually and sound wise of the show. As far as the gameplay goes, it could be a lot better. It definitely feels like a Rush title, which is really surprising because Sailor Moon was actually quite popular in Japan. When I was a kid, Sailor Moon would come on at like 6 o'clock in the morning, right when I woke up for school. It was an indicator that I would go to school. I had a little black and white TV I turned on when I was slowly waking up. So I watched Sailor Moon, and even though it was kind of like a show geared towards girls, as the seasons went on they geared it more towards guys and stuff. But Power Rangers were really popular, so even though girls like Power Rangers too, they tried to basically try to ride off of the hype train of Power Rangers and come up with other stuff that sort of had similar concepts of that Power Rangers had. On the Sailor Moon show, they rarely ever fight like a bunch of henchmen and stuff like that. There's usually one monster and they usually have to fight it, but there's not like a bunch of henchmen like Power Rangers where there's a bunch of little things they have to get through to get to the main boss or whatever. So this is standard to fair fighting game. It looks really bland. The hit detection could be better. I don't know, it feels sort of clunky. The graphics are very plain. The show wasn't terribly detailed, but I mean, it's nostalgic to me. And if you grew up, I guess this came out in 94, so 94, in the US it came out in 94. I think in Japan it came out in 92. It was based on a Japanese manga. If you're not familiar with a manga, there's a little Luna go thing instead of the thumbs up that you are the little pointer finger that you would usually get in these fighting games. Yeah, so if you don't know, a manga is basically a Japanese comic book. There was originally a Japanese comic book of Sailor Moon, and they made it into an anime. The anime became a huge hit. They actually went to the author of the comic book, who only made like a short series that basically covered the first season of the TV show, and they're like, look, this show's really popular, can you write more? So she wrote more, and then they adapted her stuff into movies and TV shows, and then they went up to 5 seasons. They only aired 4 seasons here. When I watched Sailor Moon, it was around 94. They only really had the first season. It was highly butchered. And then a few years later, when I was probably a teenager, Sailor Moon came back into popularity again when they started to show it on Toonami on Cartoon Network, which was basically Cartoon Network for adolescents, which they basically had a block of just like Japanese anime, which was pretty cool at the time because it wasn't very common. I mean, early on, like G.I. Joe, the Real Ghostbusters, the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, and then on and off they would show Dragon Ball. But some of the cartoons, Transformers, that you would think of as just cartoons you grew up with were actually drawn and stuff in Asia, not necessarily Japan, but definitely had a Japanese anime look. And some of these cartoons, even though this cartoon, particularly the first season, I believe originally came out in Japan in 92, it still had a very 80s vibe to it, which I really dug. So even though it had themes of, you know, like stuff girls would be into, like, I don't know, like liking boys and stuff like that, and falling in love, blah blah blah, it was still a fun show for a 9-year-old kid. I'm 32 years old, so it was, even though 94 doesn't seem that long ago, I guess it really was. But yeah, it was fun for girls and guys, because the girls could get like the fairy tale aspect out of it, and then guys could get the fighting and the attacks and the monsters and shit like that. So even though the first season was primarily a girls show, and it was edited to kind of be that way too as well, there was stuff for guys. I really liked the animation and the cheesy 80s sound effects that I grew up with when I was a little bit younger, like when I was an even smaller kid, like watching the Real Ghostbusters and G.I. Joe. They recycled a lot of the sound effects. The color palette were similar, so there was some sort of nostalgia vibe. When Sailor Moon became popular, I was around 12 or 13 years old, popular in the US, I mean, and my sister was really into watching MTV and voting to make sure Backstreet Boys got voted #1 every single day, because I don't know, she didn't really get anything out of it beside maybe she felt like she helped. So I was never really one to argue over the television. We had DirecTV, which only came into one room in the house. Like back then, it was quite rare to have multiple receivers unless you were rich or something. A lot of times you would have to have more than one satellite dish. I believe that was the case back then, so we only got it in the living room. So instead of fighting with her to the TV, because I would have really liked to watch all these Japanese shows, I knew that I was aware of them, but I had to miss out on them and catch up on them when I got older, because my sister had to watch anime. So I would usually go on the computer or play video games or whatever. I had a PlayStation back then, so it was no big deal. But I remember a kid whose dad traveled a lot, and he would get him like Sailor Moon PlayStation games and stuff like that. So when Sailor Moon was popular in the US, these games have already come out, so it wasn't really a wise decision to bring these games out now. And plus, I don't think these games are all that great, to be honest with you. There's an RPG I have that's a little bit better. I think Sailor Moon's more suited to a RPG format than this. There's also a lot of fighting games, especially the PlayStation 1, I believe, has a couple of them. But the music and stuff's really good. But recently, I'd say about a year or two ago, they started to release the unedited versions with a new English dub, and it was one of those deals where like, oh, that's nostalgic, I'll get it so I can remember what it was like. But it wasn't really the Sailor Moon I remember. It still had some of the fairy tale themes, but in between, the story was actually interesting. It was one of those deals like on Tommy Boy where they're in the car and they're listening to the Carpenter's Superstar. They're like, this sucks. And he's like, yeah, I know. And he's like, you want me to change it? Nah, I'll watch it if you watch it, okay? And then next thing you know, they're driving the car and you're singing along. And that's what kind of happened with Sailor Moon. Like the unedited version that had the new English voice dub, I actually ended up enjoying it, and looking in between all the girly shit like that was like nostalgic, and I just really liked watching it because it reminded me of being a kid, even though it was familiar and different at the same time. I have the second season unedited. I haven't watched it yet, but it's enjoyable if you grew up around that time, and if you can get over the cheesy segments. It really has like this 80s vibe to it I really enjoy. And the story, as the episodes went further on, actually became more interesting and a lot darker. Like, I mean, spoiler alert, they all die at the end, but you know, stuff changes around. But anyway, I figured this would be an interesting look at a game that didn't come out here, but you can get reproduction cards. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all doing well. Take care. Bye.
If you want to, like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.